Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 31st of January, after a weekend of low-key fights. In fact, I'm going to call this episode Khabib Nurmagomedov's Big Weekend, because on, was it Friday or Saturday? He had his, it would have been Friday. He had his fights in Florida, Eagle FC, their first card. I don't think it's their first card since he took over, but it's their first card in the US ever. And they did that in Florida. And then on Saturday night, he was cornering a couple of dudes in Bellator. So he's staying busy in his retirement, and you have to respect that. And, he made a ton of money out of fighting, more than most people do in MMA. So the fact that he's still so plugged in and engaged, especially as he retired, being burned out and saying like it was his dad's dream that he win a world title and he was done. So quite cool that he's doing that. So I think we'll pass judgment on that. I mean, Bellator was hilarious, because Bellator always is. But Eagle FC, how is Eagle FC? Is it any good? Is it worth your time? Can they compete? Because obviously Khabib came out this week and was like, oh, if the UFC don't treat their fighters well, Eagle FC will have them. Eagle FC is in that interesting spot where you want to get people interested, so you want to use names. But all the names who are good currently are under contract with the UFC or under contract with Bellator or under contract with one. It's a very crowded marketplace and, a monopoly because of the UFC, or at least a monopsony. Monogamy? Shout out to Lil Nogamy, who won his boxing match this weekend. Antonio Ruggiero Nogueira, that is. But you have to try and make people interested, especially if you're coming to the US, because you do have up-and-coming Russians on contract, but they don't know them. So you want to try and get people who've got names out there, and one of the ways to do that is to do, Scott Coker bollocks. Ken Shamrock versus Hoist Gracie 3. Kimbo versus Dada. MVP versus School Teacher. So they did. They tried that. They booked Tyron Spong, returning from boxing, former great kickboxer, versus Antonio Bigfoot Silva. Long-time MMA fighter, had a really bad downfall. Glory used him to puff up Rico Verhoeven's erection. Been knocked out about 1 billion times. Very sketchy matchmaking. And the insane thing was that at some point in the last 3 weeks, Florida's commission decided that they care, which was really weird. Florida commission is not one that, I'm always moaning about commissions, but there is clearly a pecking order. California State Athletic Commission, New York State Athletic Commission, Nevada State Athletic Commission. In some regards, because the Nevada State Athletic Commission is very much in the pocket of the UFC, like the deciding that we don't release purses anymore. That was Nevada's decision because the UFC asked them to. But in terms of like running a fight and trying not to get anyone killed, because it is in the interest of places that host a lot of boxing matches not to have people dying on the reg. And the same goes for MMA matches. Which means that New York State Athletic Commission can be a bit weird and step in and like call off fights that otherwise made sense. Like when they were trying to scramble to find Khabib an opponent after the McGregor bus incident and Tony dropping out. Max Holloway was booked. They gave him the okay. I think he had weight cut issues or something like that. Can't remember why, but he dropped out. They were going to bump up Paul Felder, who was on the same card, and I think he was due to fight Al Iaquinta. Al Iaquinta hadn't fought in like 2 years, and when he did fight, it was against like the ghost of Diego Sanchez. Whereas Paul Felder had been around fighting current top 15 lightweights and winning and sometimes losing, but doing decently. So Paul Felder would have made more sense as a replacement matchup. But the ridiculous UFC rankings, which was decided by like a board of about 4 people. I know it was 14 disc jockeys at that time, but it's a thing that just dudes vote on in a ballot. It's not a legitimate ranking system. But the New York State Athletic Commission looked at that as like hard evidence. So they were like, no, Paul Felder, he'll get slaughtered if you put him in there. Bring in Al Iaquinta, who hasn't fought in 2 years instead. So there's the downside of it. But the upside of it is that like it's nice that they are trying to stop this shit happening. Because BKFC is like the most flagrant one at the moment, but just deliberately mismatching people so that you get knockouts. And the Justin Thornton one is a classic example. Justin Thornton had lost his last like 11 MMA fights, all by being stopped in the first round. The guy he'd fought had already knocked him out in the first round in MMA and was like 3-0 in BKFC at that time. So when Khabib and Eagle FC, whoever's in charge of that, decided to book Bigfoot versus Tyrone Spong, for some reason, the Florida State Athletic Commission, which has never been particularly active or caring, stepped in and said, you can't do that. Bigfoot Silva can't fight. And Bigfoot Silva came out and was like, oh, they won't tell me why. Even though everyone was like, because you get knocked out all the time, mate. And then later this week, they stopped Melvin Gillard from taking a fight. I think that was with BKFC as well, but Melvin Gillard's had like 15 knockout losses in his last 20 fights or something like that. He had a really harsh fall off. He had a really stupid manager or management group because like he lost to Derek Campos by headbutt and they didn't appeal it. And then they were like, why don't we go up to middleweight to fight Chidi Njikani? That's going to link in well with Anthony Njikani fighting later. But went up to middleweight to fight Chidi Njikani. Went up to middleweight to fight fucking Israel Adesanya. If you've seen Melvin Gillard, he's not a middleweight. So anyway, Florida saved Melvin Gillard from himself and Bigfoot from himself, or more importantly, saved MMA and bare knuckle boxing from another fatality. But that did leave this card without a. This Eagle FC card without a main event. So they found Sergey Haratonov, who was out in the wilderness in Kamchatka somewhere, boxing polar bears. He's just quietly disappeared from Bellator or has like a loose deal with them. Lost to Czech Congo in a fight that I keep telling you to check out a couple of months back, but has since like knocked out Fabio Maldonado, which is, Fabio Maldonado is just being shopped from place to place in Europe, getting knocked out by whoever. Nikita Krylov knocked him out. I mean, Ryzen had Jiri defend his title against Fabio Maldonado. Fabio Maldonado, not even close to being a heavyweight, but just turns up fat and gets knocked out immediately. So they booked Sergey versus Tyrone Spong. And that was actually, by preventing them from doing the Bigfoot thing and the obvious bullshit, they booked a more compelling matchup than they originally did, which was really interesting. Maybe commissions should step in more often and we'd get less mismatches and more interesting matches out of it. But then the Florida Commission proved themselves to be clowns anyway, because they let Tyrone Spong fight in literally gym shorts. His shorts had pockets and zips, and it had one of those zipper pockets on his bum to put your phone in, I think. Or is it your wallet? I don't know what you do with that pocket. Another chap's penis. But he also had like the fucking drawstrings on the front with metal caps on them, not tied and just hanging out the front of his shorts. The reason that you don't wear like zips on your pockets and things, if you've ever rolled with someone in day one jiu-jitsu and not realized they had a zip on their clothes or whatever, and then you've rubbed your face on it, like they can cut you to ribbons. But no, they just let him, and of course if you're grappling or if you're kicking or anything and the guy's got pockets that are puffing out of his shorts, you can get your foot caught in that. I mean, think how many women get their throw a teep and get like their foot caught in the sports bra bit of the UFC uniform. It's happened like 5 or 6 times in recent years. So that was crazy, the fact that they just let Tyrone Spong turn up in shorts, gym shorts. And Tyrone Spong's a really interesting guy because he was a terrific kickboxer, truly amazing kickboxer. A light heavyweight who fought most of his career at heavyweight in K1 because that's where the money fights were. And he didn't have huge power at heavyweight, but he was extremely crisp. And through these amazing combinations, worked a lot with Lucian Carbin back in the day. But I think Spong's been to just about every gym in Holland, to be honest, or the Netherlands rather. And then towards the end of his kickboxing career, he went to Glory, came down to light heavyweight again, did some good stuff, then fought Gohan Saki in the final of a tournament, got a leg kick checked, kicked right into the top portion of the shin, broke his own shin in half, called that a day on kickboxing, decided to come to MMA, did 2 MMA matches in 2009, decided this ain't for me after going to the decision in the second one. And that was in World Series of Fighting, so it was sort of like a favour to Ray Safo as well. And then he went to boxing, and he did surprisingly well. Now, this is the thing about boxing, surprisingly well is always a bit vague, because heavyweight boxing, there are so few legitimate talents out there, and you can just be fed up on bums. Because it was him and Kyotaro, the Japanese kickboxer, both had decent careers, both got to top 15 ranked. Well, they got to top 10 rankings in one of the ranking bodies, because the ranking bodies often don't rank fighters that are ranked by other ranking bodies. So Kyotaro was ranked on one, and Tyrone Spong was ranked on another. And Tyrone Spong actually landed the big fight with Usyk, as Usyk was coming up, or Usyk, however we want to say it, as he was coming up to heavyweight, that was supposed to be his first fight. That was Spong's big chance, and he failed the drug test immediately before it. And since then, he's been in an argument with them, like sent in his B sample or his C sample or whatever. But now he's back in MMA because he wanted a quick payday. And it doesn't look like he'll be hanging around. Because Sergey Haritonov, not a great grappler. You know, if you watch him against good grapplers in recent years, he gets manhandled. Like he'll get trapped under Josh Barnett and not know what to do. And you'll be watching it going, oh yeah, this guy's got a master of sports in Sambo. But it started out like his fight with Cheick Kongo, who's back. He was walking him down, backing Spong up to the fence, hitting him with good jabs. The Sergey Haritonov jab's interesting because he's doing well with it. He's hitting with power and stunning people and like staggering backwards. But he still keeps his head on the line. So you throw it at the same time, you hit him, which is something that Big Nog used to outbox him in like 2005. And Big Nog was not a good boxer. He just knew that his head was going to be there every time he jabbed. A technique that also worked for Big Nog against Brendan Schaub and then no one else. But then Juliana Pena won a world title with it just recently. So dipping jab whenever the opponent moves in. Legit. But Spong's throwing up like switch kicks off his lead leg to the head and body, which is very cool that you can do that so quickly, but still slower than throwing it with your rear leg, and like you lock yourself in place. You know, if you want to see this just backfire over and over again, watch Kevin Lee versus Edson Barboza. Edson keeps trying to time him with the switch kick to the body as he's coming in, kind of like Giga Chikadze with his body kick, but not going into the stance first, trying to do it off the switch. Which is an extra step, and then the guy just steps up the middle and drives you onto the fence. But Sergey was able to just like pick up his leg and bundle him over easily. First round was spent mostly with Sergey mounted on him, peppering away, and then the second round was the finish. And Sergey Haritonov, well, actually, the finish was a throwback to Sergey Haritonov versus Semi Schilt back in Pride. He'll mount a guy, and then he'll force one of their hands to the floor and put his knee over the top of it. So like a mounted crucifix, you know, the side control with the knee on the arm, but you're in mount instead. So a mounted crucifix, if we're sticking to our rules of nomenclature. But if you watch the Semi Schilt one, he fucked Schilt's face up with that. He was doing hammer fists from like above his head, sitting completely upright in mount and dropping these hammer fists on Semi Schilt's undefended face. So in some respects, he's quite an interesting grappler, but he's not, you know, this is not Tyrone Spong, you know, we don't know how good his grappling is because Sergey's actually really good. This is just Tyrone Spong not at all being ready for MMA. Sergey Haritonov quite recently fought Geronimo Dos Santos, who is an actual like regional league heavyweight. My rule for like, if you're not, when you stop being a bum at heavyweight is when you are capable of beating Geronimo Dos Santos, because he's just a big dude who spazzes out. Juiced to the gills too, allegedly. But Geronimo Dos Santos got on Sergey Haritonov's back and almost choked him. And Sergey Haritonov submitted him by noticing that Geronimo Dos Santos' feet were crossed in back mount, and then doing the day one beginner cross your legs over their legs and arch your hips to do a straight Achilles lock on their feet. And, it's the case where, like, if the guy could be caught with that, how were you letting him on your back? Anyway, that was the incredibly underwhelming main event. What else was on this card? First fight of the night was actually pretty fun. This was Sitik Muduev versus Ayadi Majdadin. And Majdadin was a Tunisian lad. Muduev, I believe, was a Dagestani. He was some kind of Russian. But this was really interesting because Muduev moved into the fence and tried to fence wrestle. Majdadin seemed like he didn't really know how to deal with that, but whatever he did, he was going to do it 100%. So he's grabbing like a seatbelt from, if you're on someone's backpack style, the seatbelt is one arm over their shoulder and one arm under the other side, and you're that's how you hold yourself on. And one of the weaknesses of that generally is that, like, if you don't have the hooks in with your feet, the other guy can move around and turn to face you. But Majdadin was using it as this guy was trying to take him down. He's taking the grip on the seatbelt while the guy's like facing him and just muscling him off. I was really impressed. And then, like, as the fight progressed, he was scrambling really well. Got the decision in the end. It was a fun little fight that's well worth your time. What else was good? Jorgen De Castro turned up and guillotined a guy in round 1 on the feet. Because heavyweight MMA be bad. Dylan Salvador versus Arman Osmanov. As Osmanov, I believe, was Kazakhstani? Yes, Kazakhstani. Or is it Kazakh? Whichever one is correct. But Dylan Salvador was French and had really nice kicks. Was hammering him with low kicks from the start. Osmanov was trying to wrestle. Did some loopy kicks of his own, but like it was clear that one guy had that weird sort of like, I occasionally do spinning kicks and they're impressive because I'm very naturally quick sort of style, and the other guy had that more economical, like I have done this 1,000 times or 10,000 times, whatever Bruce Lee said, kicking style. And basically Osmanov quit at the before the start of the third. He was looking very outmatched by the end of the second. What else was good? There's a lad called Magomed Aliyev, which is a combination of Magomedov and the other lad I like. Who's Aliyev? Aliyev, the butcher? What was his name? I forget. Anyway, he took on Anthony Njoku. Anthony Njoku, WEC vet, been around for a long time, had a really fun style. He was one of the lads from like what was that Chuck Norris kickboxing style league? I believe he trained in that sort of kickboxing and then came to MMA. So he's got a really interesting little style, and the same is true of Chidi Njoku. But he's been out of like the limelight for a long time because, you know, back in WEC he had a good little run. Came to the UFC. I mean, first fight in the UFC was Edson Barboza. So that's pretty hard. But, you know, checkered record in the UFC. Left the UFC in 2014. Since then, has only really lost MMA fights and then fought in kickboxing matches or Muay Thai. Or he had a bare knuckle MMA fight in Gamebred FC like a couple of months back. Oh no, last month, and won that one. So he was back in the win column, but like he's a striker. He's a kickboxer. He has a nice step-up left kick and throws cool combinations off it. He does the step-up left kick and step back into southpaw quite a lot. But none of that was going to matter because Magomed Aliyev was all over him from the get-go. Just got on top of him and smashed him in under 3 minutes. Very impressive, but also not that impressive because, you know, Magomed Aliyev is like 8-1, hot prospect, and Anthony Njoku is like 16-12, very much in the twilight of his career. But in terms of overhyping a Russian prospect, like there was nothing quite matched this Ramazan Kuramagomedov, who took on John Howard. John Howard, he's okay, you know, sort of kickboxer, had a UFC run for a little while. Left the UFC after Tim Means knocked him out in 2015. Again, checkered record up to this. But it just felt like the commentators, Cejudo, Sonnen and someone else, were just losing their minds over Kuramagomedov, and he just wasn't doing any damage. He was taking down and trying to hold down John Howard, and John Howard was doing pretty well getting up for a guy who's not like a big known wrestler. So that was a bit of anticlimax. Ray Borg beat Cody Gibson, which is nice. Ray Borg, I thought he was looking good against Ricky Simone, you know, back in their fight in the UFC last year, maybe year before. Fuck, I can't remember where that was. No, it was definitely last year. The only problem was that he is incredibly unprofessional. Now, obviously, he has had all those problems with his child, and we all feel for him, you know, empathy, but you don't keep taking risks on people who keep missing weight and so on. So, like, if he finds a spot for himself here, that'll be really nice. If he becomes like Eagle FC's regular ass kicker. But then the real feel-good moment was the co-main event, Rashad Evans. This was another one that I was going like, fucking hell, Khabib, what are you doing? Because, you know, not only did he try and book Bigfoot to get knocked out in the main event, he also announced during this event that they've booked Kevin Lee versus Diego Sanchez, a match that was rumoured, and we all went, ha ha ha, that's fucking disgusting. I'm so glad that was just an idea. And then during this event, they were like, we're doing it. Just fucking gross. I mean, I love Kevin Lee. He's a boy of the podcast, friend of the podcast, but, you know, he is much better than 2022 Diego Sanchez, and there's no reason for him to be fighting him. But this Rashad Evans one, you know, he's a guy who had a lot of trouble getting cleared to fight medically, kept getting scans back, being sus, and multiple commissions didn't let him fight. They were shipping him around at the end, which was very sketchy. But he's had 5 years off or whatever it was. You know, when you watch him commentary, you'd be like, ooh, you know, he's slurring words a bit there, Rashad or whatever. But recently I've seen him and he looked much better. He claims that like hallucinogenics are regrowing his brain. And who am I to say they're not? You know, the amazing studies into hallucinogens and OCD and depression and all those things. You know, I'm very open-minded to that. But I mean, my God, the man's hair. Like, I'd take hallucinogens if it just kept my hairline like that. But, you know, it was a really nice surprise. Like, the guy he was fighting wasn't amazing, but did look quite good, actually. Like, he wasn't a big name, but I thought watching him had some interesting kicks, had some interesting leg entries from the bottom. Rashad didn't look great on the feet, but did get takedowns and hold top position and do the stuff that he used to do. And granted, this wasn't the guy who was, like, firing and then ducking into counter takedowns on a hair trigger against Quinton Jackson, but it was just really nice to see him perform in a manner that he can be happy with and not get badly hurt. And yeah, just felt good, man. Hopefully he retires off that, but you know, it's fighting, so probably not. But he's had a thing on his shoulder for a while about it, as you know, he's been trying to get back in the cage forever. It's nice that he was able to, and doubly nice that he did it against like an appropriate level of competition at his age and experience, or rather lack of experience in recent years. And it worked out well. So, I mean, if you're an old school UFC fan and you remember, I mean, it's been a while. So, like, there's a lot of people listening to this podcast who probably never saw Rashad Evans fight at his best. But, you know, if you're an old school fan, definitely go watch Eagle FC just for that, because it'll make you feel good. So that was your lot on Eagle FC, and honestly, not that bad. I mean, you know, you had the names who had to be there. Wasn't super blown away by Kura Magomedov. Guy who beat Anthony Njokuani looked good. Yeah, I mean, like, it's one of those things, like, you know, you've got to have so many names that the American public will know, or the American MMA fan will know. So I'm intrigued to see what their Russian roster looks like. And more names in the business is never a bad thing. And Khabib has this prestige attached to him, this fan base attached to him, that will hopefully help that promotion. Because it's an existing promotion that he brought up, I believe, with the help of a UAE prince or something like that. But like they got money, and that's good. So yeah, you know, they're going to keep trying to do gross mismatches, but that's the state of fighting generally. Just had to keep your eyes on whether the rest of it's worth watching. And to be honest, you know, even with Kamaru Usman, Chael Sonnen and Henry Cejudo on their commentary team, it wasn't that bad. They worked pretty well off each other. And then there was this Bellator event, Bellator 273. I mean, who's counting? Nobody really cares about the numbers. But there was some fun stuff on this. There was, your main event was Ryan Bader versus Valentin Moldavsky. Bader, obviously, the heavyweight champion, but hasn't defended it in 2 years since he got eye-poked by Czech Congo, who is now on the cusp of another title shot. Actually, I think they just announced another title shot. They're doing a rematch of that because that was a thumb to the eye and nose, called that one off. But Czech Congo has been on a great little run lately, despite being 46 years old, which is insane. And Bader's been fucking around at light heavyweight, where he's been getting starched by, like, what's his name? The other Fedor's protege, the light heavyweight champion. It'll come to me in a second. And Corey Anderson was beating him up too. But really, like, so many people have said this already, but this is the difference that weight cutting can make to someone. Because he was taking big punches from a big heavyweight, absolutely fine. Whereas at light heavyweight, like, his chin has always been a question mark. We were talking about his chin back when he was fighting like Keith Jardine and people like that. Because every time he got hit, it was a little bit suspicious how badly his legs gave out. Kind of like Dustin at featherweight. You know, he'd get dinged and he'd start wobbling. And I don't think he ever got knocked out bad. I don't think he ever got knocked out. Oh, no, he did by Conor McGregor, but he didn't really get knocked out a lot at featherweight, but you could see him not taking the punches well. Goes up to lightweight, no trouble taking punches. But we talk about this every fucking week. You know, why are people cutting weight? Well, because they want to be big and strong, which obviously is a Bader strength. Valentin Moldavsky is another one of, like, Fedor team, and Fedor team is interesting because it's just the people who did want Kirill, whatever his name was, Fedor's punching bag, to be the next Fedor. And now they've got these other guys and they're just like, Fedor's protege, whatever they come up. But Moldavsky is a boring fucking fighter for the most part. Like, strong grappler, but his title run, or his run to the title, consisted of him holding Roy Nelson against the fence with double underhooks for 5 rounds when Roy Nelson had lost like 12 in a row. The age-old question about, like, what if a heavyweight could go the distance is answered by Moldavsky not being able to finish. That being said, he was able to get Bader off his feet a good number of times, get on top of him. Looked pretty decent from there. Bader getting underhooks and getting up to the single constantly. But, like, right off the bat, this was almost literally Fedor versus Bader. The first one where he dinged him on the first punch and knocked him out. It was not a leaping left hook. It was a cross-counter, a right hand across the top of the jab. Smashed Moldavsky in the head. Hit him with a couple of follow-up shots that also like took his legs out. So Moldavsky takes a good shot because Bader hits very, very hard. But ultimately, this was like the worst fight on the card, and I just mentioned it because it's the big one. The stuff that was good, Sullivan Coley held down Big Tuna Ben Parrish and beat him up with not a lot of trouble. And again, like, that's going to be a thing. Like, when you're a heartwarming story about like a fighter who doesn't look like a fighter because he's chubby and stuff like that, like, that is cool, but also you're giving up that strength advantage. You know, if you got 15 pounds of non-contractile tissue that you can't really do anything with hanging around your waist, and you could be a middleweight, getting held down by big, strong light heavyweights is going to be an issue. Lucas Brennan was one that everyone was hot on. Genuinely does look like a child. It's hilarious. I mean, an absolutely jacked child, but I believe he's Chris Brennan's son, the West Side Strangler, MMA fighter from back in the day. Also turned up at ADCC. One of the first guys like putting out instructionals. He did one on I think it was on the Kimura, and then also on the 10-finger guillotine. I still remember those from back in the day. But Lucas Brennan seems to be a bit of a grappling prodigy in an MMA context. This fight was very, very fun. I haven't seen an awful lot of Lucas Brennan. I know he's been finishing people quickly, but in the course of this fight, you saw him get a takedown. The guy jumped up. He got a Merkel, an angler, as we like to call it, which is imagine putting someone in like a bulldog headlock, you know, like the bulldog choke sort of headlock, but their arm is between you and them, so you've wrapped their head and their arm. As I've said before, but Ryan Hall, in his recent Backtake series on his own website, he has some really interesting applications of the Merkel. There was a lad in the UFC a little while ago on the undercard, and he was doing it all the time to his opponent. They were shooting in, he was grabbing the Merkel along the fence, and then he couldn't really get anything cool going off it, but DC was commentating, and he was like, he keeps getting the Merkel, what's he doing? But you don't see the Merkel a lot in MMA or grappling, but it does have a place, and I think it's going to be quite cool watching it develop. And Ryan Hall does lots of rolling back takes off it, and of course you can switch to the bulldog choke if you let the arm out and you grab their neck while their head comes up. But what Lucas Brennan did, he was holding the Merkel, the guy tried to stand up, and he immediately dived through and hit an inside trip through the legs to throw him back on his back. It was lovely. And then he set up, he was knee cutting the guy's guard, and he was putting through like the reverse underhook, the octopus underhook, so that he could wrap the head and then go over the back to grab sort of like there's the Jack Hermanson guillotine, they call it, but Jack Hermanson learned it from the Danaher boys. Danaher calls it a seated katagatami. A katagatami is a head and arm triangle. A head and arm choke, arm triangle. And that is the way that it's supposed to choke people. It chokes people more like an arm triangle than it does like a guillotine. Keenan Cornelius calls it a hip hugger, which I like. But yeah, absolutely gorgeous choke. Very, very tricky. You know, you've seen Jack Hermanson did like 3 people in a row with it, and then Jacare finally turned his back to the choke and worked his way out. But the way that Brennan had it was he was facing down into the mat, and the other guy was in his armpit, you know, head and arm, facing up at the ceiling, and he had the leg turked up in the air, like he was really hooking it and driving it up backwards like he was mule kicking. And it was very cool. And someone pointed out, like, this was the first time that someone has actually used a wrestler's turk in MMA, like consciously, as opposed to just sitting on the leg in half guard. And Goldie wasn't even there to mention it. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to go back and watch Lucas Brennan's other fights now. This is the thing with guys coming up in Bellator, because they're always fighting guys who just aren't very good. They're being fed like the boxing path, and I just can't get invested. I don't really care that much if a wicked choke works on a guy who's like 0-3. Nikita Mikhailov versus Blaine Shut was funny because Nikita Mikhailov knocked him down in the first round, was all over him for the second and third, and then in the end of the third, Blaine Shut, whatever his name is, points at the mat and is like, come on, let's go, like Max Holloway, and immediately gets dropped again and pounded out. It's just the most Bellator of Bellator fighters I've ever seen. But this was a 9-1 guy going up against an 8-6 guy because it's Bellator. Dalton Roster versus Dwayne Johnson was crap, aside from the fact the guy's name was Dwayne Johnson. Sadawad got head kicked. Sadawad is like Bellator Sam Alvey. He hasn't won a fight in like 7 fights. Oh no, he's won 1 fight in like 7 fights. But they'll keep him around forever because he's Bellator Sam Alvey. Actually, Bellator Sam Alvey is Big John McCarthy, because I have never seen anyone say they enjoy his commentaries. Not like Mike Goldberg, where some people were just, people had been like kicked in the head by a horse as kids. They loved just Mike Goldberg making the same sounds over and over again with his mouth. Big John can't find a single person to recommend him or say that he's doing a good job. The best they can do is like, there are other bad commentators out there. And you're like, well, none of them are worse than Big John. Even Goldie was better. They should have kept Goldie and canned Big John. I have no idea what they're fucking doing. They're literally making their own product unwatchable. But the good fight was Darian Caldwell versus Enrique Barzola. Interesting because Barzola, the last time I talked about him was when he had that grappling barn burner against Hani Yahya, where Hani Yahya looked awesome for a round and a half and then looked 40 for the second and third rounds. And it was really interesting because he was trying to survive against this big, well-conditioned wrestler. So he was doing things like going into the deep half guard and hiding his head behind Barzola's back and then just holding on. Or his escapes from the bottom of side control were really good. Like he'd hook a leg in like an empty half and Barzola would knee slide out and he'd turn to his knees and get up. But this one was very good because Caldwell is like tenacious wrestler, not a great striker, really just goes after takedowns, and he will take any takedown he can. He's going in on low singles, he's coming up on high crotches, he's taking any sort of takedown. He works from the clinch really well. And he goes hard in the early going and tries to submit people, whereas Enrique Barzola has done great like over the distance, just catching up with people due to his conditioning. And he works at the same sort of pace too. So really great fight, back and forward, loads of scrambles, both guys coming up on top. Darian Caldwell doing beautiful work with the high crotch crackdown, which is such a cool move. And again, that was Enrique Barzola's last fight against Hani Yahya, a guy who really does well with the high crotch crackdown. Because what you're doing is you're just putting the guy's hip on the floor and taking away all his explosive ability, and you're making it into a weird scramble where it's not quite jiu-jitsu, but it's not really wrestling either. Like, it's just this mess. If you watch Jake Shields' career, but Jake Shields versus Dan Henderson is a great example, just all over the place, turning upside down and stuff, but still coming out on top. But then in the third round, Enrique Barzola's conditioning gets the better of Caldwell, and he manages to score the TKO, basically just by getting on him and hitting him loads. It was just Caldwell gave out, basically, but not a bad performance from Caldwell, actually, and I really enjoyed Barzola. I don't know why the UFC cut him because, well, I mean, it's not so much cut. When you say cut, you think of like cut, but when it can be like they don't see the value of having him and his contract expired, which is probably what happened. But like his run was, he was on a draw against Hani Yahya, which probably should have been a win. I mean, Hani Yahya did his utmost to scrape the draw there, and before that, he just lost the decision to Evloev, who's very good. So. Yeah, not a bad guy, and great to have him in the division, and he's just beaten their former champion, so look forward to more of the bantamweights over there. They got a Grand Prix coming up, so that Sergio Pettis doesn't have to rematch Koji Horiguchi. Then there was more classic Bellator with Henry Corrales eye-poking Aiden Lee and causing a no contest after doing really well in that fight. And then there was the co-main event, which was Benson Henderson versus Islam Mamedov. Mamedov was 20-1. Benson Henderson was on a 4-fight losing streak, I think. But, he's Benson Henderson. He has competitive fights with most people. And he had been fucking around at welterweight too, which just is not worth it. Like, after this fight, because this was, Khabib was in the corner, and there's an awful lot of, like, Khabib undefeated as a coach in 2021 or whatever it was. But a lot of that is because Bellator treat the Dagestanis who are Khabib adjacent like they do the Straight Glass Gym Ireland fighters. If you are from either of those gyms or camps, you are going to get easy fights in Bellator because they just like having the person who is connected with you there and the bandwagon that comes with it. But Benson Henderson here, it was a split decision. It was close, but like I've said this before, but Benson Henderson, I feel like he could have a split decision He could go to a split decision against 2022 Diego Sanchez and 2019 Khabib Nurmagomedov. Because when he was UFC champion, like he was having close fights with Gilbert Melendez, who was very much on the way down, and Josh Thompson, who was just sort of scraped together a couple of wins to get the title shot. They shouldn't have been on his level. But then he was also winning razor-thin decisions over Frankie Edgar. So, it's he's just got a really weird style that brings out or makes it a fairly even scrap. And Mamedov probably lost this. I mean, there were bits where Benson was jumping on guillotines and stuff, and you go, "No, Benson, what are you doing?" Even though you are also going, but he did finish 6 people with the guillotine back in WEC. WEC, people were obsessed with the guillotine because that lightweight division, Pettis, Cerrone, Henderson, I think people like Varner, there's a couple of others who were around at that time too, but they were all picking up arm-in guillotine wins, and arm-in guillotines are quite hard to finish. So there was all this talk about like the WEC guillotine technique. Like they're not all training together and like sharing the guillotine secret. But it does, like if there's a guy in your gym who has a good arm-in guillotine, it does become like a sort of secret technique sort of thing. But what I really liked, Mamedov probably cost himself this fight by not striking enough. Because that's the thing that I'm noticing a lot with guys who are like Khabib adjacent versus actually Khabib. The thing about Khabib was like people, I talked to friends and they were like, "Oh, that Khabib, he had a boring style, didn't he?" I'm like, no. If he didn't hit people, it would be a boring style. But every minute of the fight, every second of the fight, Khabib's punching people, trying to punch them as hard as he can from positions where you can't really hit that hard, but he's working. Whereas you notice with people like even Makhachev, who's elite, you just do not see that same like every second tenacity. And Mamedov here was like, it was all back clinch, mat returns, will not open up and strike at any point. And part of that is because Henderson was scrambling so well, he didn't want to let go of him. But if you don't open up with strikes until like the last 15 seconds of the fight, don't be surprised when you lose a split decision. What I did like from the Benson Henderson in this fight was the Granby and the Victor roll, both of which, the Granby is a great one because when guys are back body lock on you and they come around the side and they put their knee in front of yours and they try and sag on you to drive you down to your hands and knees. The standard Khabib mat return, everyone does it. I mean, they all do it now, but like get back, body lock, sag on the guy, take him down to the mat so you don't have to like lift him up and slam him or anything. And it's exhausting. But you saw Abel Trujillo work this out a couple of times in their match, and it worked for Benson Henderson here against Mamedov. Sorry, Abel Trujillo versus Khabib. In the course of being dragged down, you can roll through and use that momentum to do a Granby and open up the elbow, get back to the feet. And Abel Trujillo did that 2 or 3 times before Khabib was able to stop him from doing it. And Benson Henderson did it here in the first round. And then later, Mamedov's hanging on back body lock again, doesn't want to like put weight into Benson in case Benson rolls. And he opens his grips to punch Benson in the head, and Benson just rolls through on a knee bar attempt. So yeah, it was cool offense from Benson. The guillotines did get him into trouble a bit and could have seen him lose the fight. I mean, he obviously did on one card, but honestly, just nice to see Benson Henderson get a win again. But then he shook hands with Mamedov and Khabib, and did you see the size of Khabib next to him? I mean, I know that all of Benson Henderson's weight is in his fucking gigantic thighs, but just like the height, the width, the girth, you're going like, how are these guys in the same weight class? And I remember when Benson Henderson was fighting like Frankie Edgar, people were going, "Oh, he's so huge, Frankie needs to go down." And Frankie's gone down 2 weight classes now. I mean, just drying yourself out like a raisin seems to be the thing that is progressing the fastest in MMA now. So probably preferred Eagle FC. Maybe it didn't come off that way from how I reported them, but I thought Bellator actually did a good job this weekend. Both probably worth your time, or at least the ones that I said were good are probably worth your time. And I reckon we'll call it there for today, and we'll be back Wednesday, Thursday for the Boycast. Got some fights going on this weekend. Strickland versus Hermansson. Yeah, okay. Some interesting stuff hidden on that card. You got Shavkat, who everyone's very hot on, 14-0. You got Sam Alvey versus Phil Hawes. Wondering how Phil Hawes is going to blow that. You got Brian Battle coming back from The Ultimate Fighter, trying to recover from recent boot-licking comments about UFC pay. You got Julian Erosa, hot off the heels of being Matt Brown 2. Miles Johns is back. Hakeem Duodo. Chidi Njokuani. Man, I can't get away from the Njokuani boys this episode. Philip Rowe, fresh off being submitted 100 times by Gordon Ryan. And Alexis Davis, who's fighting at like 45 years old now. So fun enough. But we'll talk about that then. If you want to get in on the extra episodes and podcasts, support the podcast and be a boy, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Fight of the dog, dog in the fight of the dog in the fight of the dog, bless.